Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. I'm Andrew Maraniss. I'm the author of Singled Out, a biography of Glenn Burke, who was the first openly gay Major League Baseball player and the inventor of the high five. And I'm here today with my great friend and mentor in the baseball business, Rick Vaughn, who is the author of a brand new book about the history of baseball and spring training in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is where I got to know Rick when he was my boss with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays at the time in the inaugural season of 1998. But Rick's book is called 100 Years of Baseball in St. Petersburg's Waterfront, How the Game Helped Shape a City. Rick, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
So good to see you, Andrew. So many good memories come back as soon as I see your face. So it's great to see you, buddy.
Yeah, you too, Rick. That was a really special season. And for me, being a lifelong baseball fan, to be a part of a major league team as it was just getting started was really incredible. And I owe you so much for hiring me. And I've always felt like a great deal of guilt for leaving you after 1 year and coming back here to Nashville. But I so appreciated that chance to have, a cup of coffee in the major leagues.
We had a lot of fun. We didn't win much, but and we learned a lot. I think the thing, looking back on it, was that if you look at all the top positions that were hired by the Devil Rays, like none of them had ever had experience with that job before. The owner had never owned anything before. The GM had never been a GM. Larry Rothschild never managed. Our general counsel and on down the line, they had no experience with any of this stuff. And I was really one of the few that did have some experience. So it was a challenge. It was kind of challenging, but looking back on it, it was so much fun to be a part of that.
Yeah. And speaking of your experience, I mean, you had a career of over 30, close to 40 years in professional sports with the Orioles, the Rays, the Washington football team, as it's known now. And I know you just have the very best reputation amongst your peers in the PR business in sports, but also I think even more important among the sports writers themselves, who always looked up to you as the best in the business and are not shy about saying that. And even the forward to your book by your friend Tim Kirkchin, just really special about the way he respects you. And I know you have a great relationship with him, going all the way to Cooperstown recently.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Timmy's a special person. I was so excited for him to win that award, and it was a real emotional time. I know the family well, not just because he was our beat writer. As it turned out, it was just total fluke. He ended up, while we were working together, he ended up buying a house on my street, and he lived 3 doors down from me. And it was the funniest thing when he told me where he was looking, and I'm like, Tim, that's where I live. So we really got to know each other very well. And it was really like a brother, watching him receive that award. And he's so deserving of it. And, to see so many people that love him the way they do, it's really something. I told him it was one of the best weekends I've ever had, up there. And it was because it felt like it was family.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, one of the things that Tim talked about in his foreword to your book was your own, sort of like real baseball credentials as a player, and the memories that you shared, about playing with your dad and pitching in college. Like, can you tell us a little bit about your own background as a baseball player?
Yeah, my dad definitely was very influential, and as I said in the what I wrote in the book, it really had nothing to do with him pressuring me to play. We just loved the game together. Whenever we could go to a game at the Senators, we would get over to the stadium, and the game was always on in the background of my life, whether it was, and most of the time it was radio, because not all the games were on TV, but that was like the constant background of our life was, Dan Daniels and John McLean were doing the radio at that time, and they were like this presence was just always there in our life. And so I grew up around that and played, started playing in Little League. I actually went to T.C. Williams High School. So if you saw the movie, Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington, I wasn't on the football team, but I was on the baseball team. and got to play there, and got to go to George Mason University and pitch there for 4 years. And I always tell everybody I was kind of a rock thrower. I threw hard. I didn't have particularly a lot of movement on my balls, but I did throw pretty hard. I probably was the hardest thrower on the staff. And I didn't really learn how to pitch until it was probably too late, and I always go back to that quote from Warren Spahn, which to me is the best quote ever about pitching. And that is that hitting is timing and pitching is disrupting timing, and so I'm like, I wished I had that as my mantra, when I was younger. And I think about it now, like if I was going to teach somebody to pitch, a kid that was 11 or 12 years old or 10 years old, I really wouldn't even think about them throwing any kind of breaking pitch, because I realized that if you can spot your fastball, get to the point where you can throw your fastball where you can locate, and then just throw something like a straight change that upsets the timing. I think you can go pretty far without, until you introduce some kind of a breaking pitch. I really do. And that's all about hitting your locations. That means practicing. That means, throwing as much as you can. I'm a little bit more of a believer in throwing more than less. Nowadays it's they've kind of flipped that over on its head now. You really throw less.
Right.
I mean, remember when we used to play pepper? I mean, I guarantee you I'd love to ask major league players right now, do you know what that game is? Pepper, have you ever heard of it? And I'm sure
right. They don't even
less
know.
than 10% of them are going to say, I know what it is. So,
So
I was lucky. I got to play all the way through college, and got a partial scholarship, and never really wanted to get rid of it. And then even after I got out of college, I pitched on a bunch of teams, 30 and over, 40 and over. I think that was about as high as I got, was 40 and over. And my, the two things happened to me in that 40 and over league. I would look in to get the sign, and then I would go to the stretch or whatever. And then I would think, wait a minute, what did he call? and then, the reaction time. The last time I pitched, it wasn't a ball that was hit particularly hard, but I got hit on the left knee by a line drive, and I could see it coming very clearly. I just couldn't get, the body to work in time to catch the ball. And it was more of a laughable situation than anything else, because I was like, how do I not get over to that ball, But at that point, I realized it was probably time to hang it up.
Maybe you're going to have to join Bill Lee in the bullpen for the Savannah Bananas one of these days.
Oh, my gosh. I can't. That's on my bucket list to see them play. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Fun. So growing up on the East Coast, did you have a chance to ever go down to Florida to see spring training when you were growing up, or during your college days, or immediately after?
I never did. And I wished, what I know now, what I knew then. I mean, I would have been able, even, during college on breaks, I would have tried to get down here to watch games, because once I started in baseball with the Orioles in 1984, that spring training is still, to our family, just this magical time. My very first year, Sue, my wife, couldn't come down with me, but every year after that, the family came, and we had so much fun, and we used to look forward to it. And we would wave it in the face of our neighbors, because we'd be leaving, Maryland or Virginia, and it was like 25 degrees out. We would be leaving right around Valentine's Day, and we couldn't wait to, we would drive down a lot of times, and it's such a magical time. And I know, and I wrote a little bit about that in the book, that it is, the statistics and things that come out of spring training game, they don't mean anything. Nobody cares who wins the league. Nobody cares who finishes last. But, those iconic scenes, those memories that you see baseball with a palm tree in the background and the water in the background, those are things that did a lot to promote the game, across the country, and did so much to promote tourism in the state of Florida. So it definitely had an impact. It was spring training, but it still was so impactful in terms of promoting the game, and obviously promoting the city of St. Petersburg specifically.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you a lot more about that. I think just to share my own experience, we would drive down from Washington, D.C. when I was probably between 10 and 15 years old and go down to Bradenton and Clearwater, Dunedin, St. Pete for spring training games. Every year I would get a notebook and with magic marker draw the logos of the teams that I knew we were going to see down there, and then get the players to sign those pages, you know.
Oh, wow.
I was a Milwaukee Brewers fan. They were always out in Arizona, but sometimes there would be former Brewers on teams. I remember Dave LaPointe. You remember him, the pitcher?
Oh, yeah.
Who had been a Brewer. He was on the Cardinals when I asked for his autograph, and I was wearing a Brewers hat. And I told him, like, I liked you better when you were on the Brewers. And he called me a knucklehead, you know, like, I'll never forget that. And then one year, I was so happy to see Tommy Walton, the singing hot dog vendor, mentioned in your book. I didn't know at the time, when I was 12 years old, that he was someone that everyone knew, you know, and I got his autograph, and I still have that on my card.
Oh, great. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, you know, what was the inspiration for you to write this book? You didn't have to do it, you know, like, why did you decide to spend your time writing this book?
And that's a good question, because I didn't set out to write a book. You know, it was a number of things that happened, you know, in a short span of time that got me to thinking about it. And the first thing was, I was actually down in St. Petersburg. Sue and I went out to the pier to see the new pier, and we parked at Al Lang. And we went out to the pier, and we were coming back. I looked up at the ballpark, and it's a soccer venue now. The Tampa Bay Rowdies play there, and they've done a great job of turning that into a soccer venue. But I noticed that they had covered the entire outside of the stadium, kind of shrink wrapped it with Rowdies promotional logos and stuff. And I was like, where's the name of the stadium? And I walked all the way around, and I couldn't find it. And so then I thought, you know, I'm like, that's not right. You know, that's not right. And then I started thinking about the city of St. Pete had been doing a really good job recently of really celebrating their history with some monuments and memorials and statues around the city of significant people or events. And this had all happened like in the previous 18 months. So I thought, you know, so I went back down to Al Lang, walked around, found very little there on the grounds that even mentioned baseball. I found a little plaque that was dedicated in 1977, which is when they built the version now of Al Lang Stadium. And it had, as I mentioned in the book, it had less than 50 words about Al Lang. So I started to think, you know, this isn't right. And there wasn't even, I looked it up. There's like 5,000 historical markers in the state of Florida, and Al Lang doesn't have one. And so I actually made an appointment. I met with one of the city council members. This would have been in February of 2021. And just said, look, I've got no skin in the game, but isn't there a way that we could better memorialize the sport? I mean, we have there's so much growth in St. Pete these days, Andrew. You wouldn't recognize some of the buildings, and there's cranes everywhere. And I thought, here's this influx of people that probably don't even know baseball was played there, because the Rays last year, there was 2008. And then it dawned on me that the first year that Major League Baseball was played on that site, there were 3 ballparks that were built on that waterfront with overlapping footprints, but Waterfront Park, Al Lang Field, Al Lang Stadium. That it was 100 year of the first year that Major League Baseball was played there was 2022. So all of these things came into play. So when I met with the city councilman, I said, look, I just like to see if we can do a better job of memorializing what went on down there. And he liked the idea. So he said, can you help us? And I said, well, let me research this really thoroughly. And the first thing I wanted to do was look up, which was tedious, but I wanted to look up how many Hall of Famers actually played there. And so I started doing that. And then the beauty of that was I basically uncovered all of these stories, you know, these things that I had never really been aware of, which was embarrassing because I'd been the PR director for the Orioles for 3 years when we trained there, and then 10 years with the Rays. And I didn't know, I just scratched the surface, my knowledge of what went on down there. So I started doing this research, and then I started sending it to this councilman, and I really couldn't get him to move on it. And so nothing really came out of that. But I had all this research, and I loved researching it. I had so much fun doing it. It was almost like I can't wait to see what happened the next day there, you know. Yeah. And between the Sporting News and the New York Times and of course the St. Petersburg Times, Tampa Tribune to some extent. I was really able to piece together, some just about every day. There were not many gaps in there from 1922 all the way up until today. And my wife was like, she said, "You have all this stuff," and I told her, I said, "This is like a hobby for me now. It's like stamp collecting used to be. Like I would find something, some kind of nugget, and I would say, this isn't a really long story, but it's an interesting fact that I don't think people know that really kind of enhanced the whole, theme down there, the whole, vision of what went on down there." And so I kept getting this, and she finally said, "Well, why don't you write a book?" And I really didn't think I had the energy to do it. And then I talked to my friend, Tim Kirchen, and Tim was like, "You have to do it." So I wrote some stuff. I sent it to him. He really liked it. And so then I thought, all right, let's see if I can figure out how to piece all of this information together. And I pretty much did it as, different eras. I kind of looked at it at different eras of, starting with Al Lang and getting baseball there, and then going through the Yankees coming, and then the Cardinals coming, the Great Depression, and then World War II and how it impacted, and then Jackie Robinson coming there and breaking the color barrier in St. Pete, which was actually broke up by Sam Jethro from the Boston Braves. But and then just taking it all the way through pretty much till the end, and was lucky enough to find Arcadia Publishing, and so I was so happy to publish it. I'm glad we're selling some copies of it, but I'm more thrilled just to be able to get it published.
Yeah. Well, baseball in St. Pete, spring training in St. Pete is synonymous with Al Lang. For those who don't know who he was, who was Al Lang, and why was baseball something that was important to him?
Yeah, that's another thing that I felt like, everybody just in St. Pete, you kind of know, well, Al Lang, I'm not really sure who he was, but he had something to do with baseball there. Or if you're a little bit further along, you'd be like, yeah, he brought baseball to St. Pete. And then you start looking into his life. And that was probably the most interesting part for me. And that really got me going. And that was early on in the process, was learning about him. And he had grown up in Pittsburgh, was a big baseball fan there. They had like the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. He was born before the turn of the century. And so he really fell in love with the game there, opened up a laundry business that went through the roof. And at a very young age, he was able to, he got sick, but he had made an awful lot of money at a young age. And the doctors basically said to him, "Look, this lifestyle up here, this weather, this stress you're under is not going to do you well." So they moved. They didn't know where they were going. They basically just headed south. And, the legend has it that they just got on the train and went as far as the train would take them, which, ended right at the water, right downtown St. Petersburg. So he came down there with this love of baseball, fell in love with the city, and right away realized that, like many people did, that this was going to be a tourism stop, that was where that was going to make its mark. But I don't think anybody had really figured out how to activate that. And he was smart enough where he saw his love of baseball, his eventual love of the city, and he married that. And he got baseball down actually for the first time in 1914. The St. Louis Browns were here for a year, and then the Phillies came for a few years. But then it died off in 1918. There was no baseball for the next 3 years. And that's when they got, and it was at a ballpark that eventually got torn down across the other side of town. And so he got minor league baseball kicked off here. And by the way, he was a two-time mayor. And so, he was the mayor. He realized the importance of tourism. Everything they did was to change and improve the image of the city, to make it something that was desirable, and then get people down here for baseball. And so, he wanted baseball here. He wanted Major League Baseball here. He finally got it in 1922, but he was smart enough to realize that it wasn't just baseball. It was New York. He got Boston down here first, one of the top three major media markets, and then he got New York. And so the Yankees came in 1925. And so he not only had baseball here, he had two of the three top media markets in the country here.
Mhm.
And so really what ended up happening was the sleepy little fishing village where when he came down here around 1910, started turning into this pretty major media center the first quarter of every year. And as it turned out, from 1922 until the Mets left in 1987. So you're talking about a lot of time when you had New York media here, except for the 3 years during the war when spring training didn't exist in Florida because of travel restrictions, where you had New York media here. And so it became this thing. And one of the things that I loved about the book was reading about how when the Yankees came here in 1925, now the Braves were here in 22, and then they brought a second team in, and it was the Yankees. And when the Yankees got here, they didn't really care for it because they had been in New Orleans, and now they're going to St. Pete. Where's St. Pete?
Yeah.
And after just a couple of years, that all changed. They fell in love with the city, and the other thing was their very first year of training in the Yankees' first year in 1925 was like the only year in the next 50 years where they finished like in the second division. And so the owner, Rupert Murdoch, was like, he was very upset. I'm sorry, it was Colonel Rupert was the owner of the team.
Mm.
He was very upset and was like, maybe this was a really bad idea. And then, of course, that all changed, and they loved it. And to the point where I found that Babe Ruth's, his birthday was in February, and he would come down and celebrate his birthday before spring training started rather than stay in New York. He was down, he loved the city that much that I think it was 6 of the last 7 years that he was with the Yankees. He came down early and spent his birthday down here. So here's a guy who didn't really care for it either. There was not the nightlife that he was used to for spring training, and he was like its biggest ambassador. But getting back to Al Lang, the great thing about Al Lang was Al never ever, that passion that he had for the city, the twin passion for the city and baseball, never ever dimmed. And if you can imagine, not just getting baseball there, but keeping baseball there. I mean, can you imagine how many times the Yankees must have been courted to leave by another city, and that still they stayed until 1961? I mean, that's an amazing feat that he was able to keep them there and to keep them happy. And even though they were sharing a facility, a lot of teams at some point might have said, well, we want our own place. Now, they had their own training facility over on 4th Street in St. Petersburg, which today is called Huggins Stengel Field. And the city built that. They had to build that to get the Yankees there in 1925. But, there was probably a yearning to have their own facility, but they were so happy with what the treatment they got there and the way Al Lang cared so much about it. And then he became this ambassador for spring training in Florida. Like if you were going to move, because back in those days, spring training was all over the place, with Texas and Louisiana and everywhere in between. But he became the guy, if you wanted to bring a team to Florida, he became the guy you kind of had to go see. He was the man to see to get it done. And he never, ever, ever stopped talking about St. Pete and how great it was and how baseball was so influential. It was in 1929. At that point, they allowed the American League presidents during the winter, pick their own site for their headquarters during the winter. And the American League chose St. Petersburg for several years. So that's how important it became, to baseball itself. And there were a lot of things I found that Al Lang, I think he went to the World Series every year from like 1903 until he couldn't, his health wouldn't allow him to go anymore. And he was doing the same thing there every year. He was promoting St. Petersburg. Wow. And so to me, he had to be one of the most influential people, citizens in the city's history to do, what he did. And I think that's often way underplayed. I think he really was somebody of great significance. And that just learning about him, and he was a pretty humble guy. He, that everybody seemed to love him, and he was involved. He was involved whether it was fans, teams, players, owners. He was just such an integral part of baseball for all those years, yet pretty much most people outside of St. Pete didn't know who he was.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that this project started with your interest in determining how many Hall of Famers had played there in St. Pete. And in your last answer, you mentioned names like Jackie Robinson and Babe Ruth. What did you find out about the notable players that that played in St. Petersburg in spring training. And I guess one of the advantages, even over some major league venues, is spring training. You know, before the days of interleague baseball, you could have potentially had players from the American League and the National League coming through town. What were some of your favorite stories and some of the names you came across?
Yeah, there's no question. I ended up with 193 either players or managers were on those grounds there. And I was talking to Steve Garvey because he had an interesting story too about because he grew up in Tampa, and he had a very interesting story, which I'll get to in a minute, about Al Lang. But he was, he said to me, if you think about it, what maybe Fenway and maybe Yankee Stadium, but other than that, old Yankee Stadium, how many grounds could say they had that many Hall of Famers play there? He goes, I don't think so. I don't think anybody could have surpassed that. And you're right. A lot of it had to do with the fact that there were two teams there, and they were from 1938 until 1961, it was the Yankees and the Cardinals. And they're still the two most successful. They were the two most successful franchises then, and they still are in terms of World Series, championships. So that gave them. There was this, 1968 was a year that was just a real phenomena. That there were 28 future Hall of Famers played in one spring down on that field. And that was just a happenstance that that happened, but still, that's an amazing situation. That something like that occurred. And and players like Steve Garvey, who's not in the Hall of Fame, who had, some really good stories to tell. And one of them was he grew up in Tampa, and his father was a bus driver. And one day his dad came in and said to him, "Hey, I think you probably need to miss school tomorrow. I got an interesting assignment." And it was to pick up the Brooklyn Dodgers, who were flying in from Vero Beach, and take them from the airport over to Al Lang, where they were going to play the Yankees. And so he rides with his dad over on the bus, gets to the ballpark. And when he gets off the bus, they ask him to be the bat boy for the Dodgers. As it turned out, it was Jackie Robinson's last game there in 1956.
Wow.
And so he was able, he was there. He sat in the dugout. At one point, Jackie Robinson didn't see him and sat right on top of him. He was very apologetic about it. But he was that close to it. And being able to talk to somebody who was there. And that was another part of the book that I didn't really think much about Jackie Robinson's impact. Like, well, he didn't, they didn't train there, but they were across the state. He must have played there. And as it turned out, he played there 7 times. And I did enough research where the top 11 crowds for spring training baseball on the grounds there, 5 of them were games that Jackie played in. And he only played 7 games there. So,
wow.
I think there were something like maybe 12 or 13 crowds of over 7,000 in the history over there. And 5 of them were his games. It was just crazy that people really, really responded to it, both black and white, to see him play. And that was, Don Zimmer's wife, Soot Zimmer. I quoted her a little bit in the book. She was at one of the games, and she was saying it was phenomenal how many people were, on the grounds there. And they put temporary bleachers in every time that Jackie came in. And, he was obviously very graceful and very grateful. And they would usually recognize him before the game in some fashion, and he would be there for everybody. And just a really very pleasant man. And, just thinking that, for all those years, Gehrig and Ruth and even Ted Williams, played there as a visiting player. Willie Mays played there as a member of the Mets for one spring. It's really crazy. Bob Gibson, the dominant, probably, if you had to pick a pitcher that probably threw more innings than anybody down there, it was him, And so it was just uncovering all the things. One thing that really I thought was really kind of cool was that, we all know Shoeless Joe Jackson and his story. He was actually coming down to St. Pete to manage a winter league team that was made up of, it was major league players that were coming down to play. And right before he came down is when the grand jury in Chicago handed down the indictments, and that was it. He was done. Wow. He couldn't come and manage, but he was going to be wearing the St. Petersburg Saints uniform. And I'd never heard that before. I never knew that he was ticketed to come down here. And he tried, he really tried and appealed to the owner of the team, but they, that was it. It was done. It wasn't going to happen. And so there was just so many things like that, throughout the book. I love the story. Ted Williams played here a number of times with the Red Sox. And I'd love to have been there to see this. But back in the day, Waterfront Park, there was actually a couple of palm trees out in deep left center field. And he hit a ball that was over 400 feet that hit off a palm tree and ricocheted, out in the field somewhere. And I think he thought when he hit it, the ball was way out, and he had to basically sprint around the bases to get a home run, and they won the game 1-0. I would have loved to have seen his reaction after that,
Yeah.
But it was all part of spring training. Casey Stengel was there. I loved reading about him, and he was there as a player and a manager, and even the way. And I got a couple of historians to tell me to weigh in on this a little bit. Even when you go back to some of the bleak times when the Great Depression hit, I had a couple historians tell me that they felt the fact that New York and Boston were training in St. Pete at the time, and the people that had money were still coming down to spring training. And you saw, I described that you saw so many cars through St. Pete with Massachusetts and New York license plates. But even having the economy spurred by these two markets really helped get St. Petersburg probably out of the Depression a little sooner than they had not been there. So, and then the other thing too was seeing Al Lang's passion really come out when the war came, when the World War II came, and they put the restrictions on the travel. The teams could not come to Florida for spring training. And, he was like a panther in a cage. He was going crazy trying to figure out how to get baseball down here during the war. And his argument was, hey, you've got all these, and St. Pete served as a military training area. So you had a lot of military here. I think during the war, there was over 100,000 military that came through here. So he was like, hey, we've got these military, and when they have a little downtime, what better to let them watch baseball games down here? So he argued that pretty thoroughly, and to no avail. It went on for 3 years. And then he came up with a bunch of great ideas about having some of the baseball players that served in the war and maybe got injured or whatever to come to St. Pete and to start like rehab work, and things of that nature. So he had one of those minds that never stopped, and deserves so much credit. And I'd at least like to see them get his name back on the stadium.
Yeah, it sounds like it, at a minimum, and hopefully your book will help accomplish that.
Well, I'm not on a mission. I'm not going to be a crusader here, but I do think that what's right is right, and I do think as a baseball fan, and we all are concerned about preserving the history of the sport, and so I just feel like this is the right thing to do. And I've gone up to, part of my research was I went up to Orlando to see what had been done in Orlando for Tinker Field, which was an old ballpark that was there a long time. And they've put together a really cool kind of a plaza, an outdoor plaza. The ballpark is gone now. It's right near where their soccer venue is, but they've put together a really cool outdoor plaza that would probably take you 30 minutes just to walk around it and to read all the information that's there about the history of baseball that was played there for a long time, but not nearly the history that Al Lang Stadium had. And the same thing in Clearwater. I went over there. They have kind of a monument park. I actually helped them write a lot of the copy for the monuments. So I went over there and visited it again. And it's another thing where it would take you 15 minutes to go through it and bring back the memories of all I put a list together for them of the Hall of Famers that played on those fields. Okay. And so I've seen it done. I know it can be done, and it's educational and it's respectful, and it promotes, it also promotes the city, so I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to camp out on City Hall steps or anything, but I am going to continue to try to push this a little bit and see if we can get at least some kind of recognition for what went down there, because what's down there now is pretty slim.
Yeah. Well, we have time just for a couple more questions. So I wanted to ask you, the subtitle to your book is How the Game Helped Shape a City, and you talk about how baseball really helped grow St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was an ideal place for spring training. Now the city is, bigger and better than it's ever been. There's Major League Baseball there. But do you feel like this is sort of the fulfillment of Al Lang's dream, or has something been lost, in that it's not the sort of special, quaint spring training city that it used to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if he was probably smiling from up above, in 1995 when they announced that the team was coming here. I mean, ultimately, that would have probably been, something that would have given him great joy. But it isn't, you're right, it isn't the same. It's not the same. I think we were all, even when you were there, I think we all admitted that the ballpark was probably the number one negative to the franchise. It was outdated way before we ever played a game. I mean, the timing of it was, when you think about it, they finished it in like 91, and here comes Camden Yards in 92, which turned the whole industry on top of its head. And so all of a sudden, it's, what the industry was going away from these concrete donuts and these domes with very little character. So I think, obviously it definitely changed things. It's different. I don't know that it promotes the city. I mean, it is Major League Baseball, and there's some cachet to that, of course, and maybe that does help. But certainly, you don't have those vistas, those iconic pictures from spring training. And the other thing I didn't mention was, back then, I unofficially, I think this is accurate, St. Petersburg became the first city to hire a public relations director for the city. And he was very creative. He was very good. He never missed an opportunity to get those photos out that were combining, the baseball with the sunshine and baseball with the water. And so that's why you saw a lot of that out there. I mean, that was a propaganda machine going on at full tilt. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the PR guy and Al Lang were pretty good friends.
Well, let me ask you a PR guy question. So the book is 100 Years of Baseball on St. Petersburg Waterfront by Rick Vaughn. If people are interested in buying it, where can they find it? And I know you also have a Facebook page dedicated to the book. So where else can people find you, more information about the book?
Yeah, it's probably the best way is just to go to Arcadia Publishing. You can order it through there, but you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. If you're local here, you should be able now to be able to get it just about most of the local bookstores. Should all have it. And, I think that, to me, it appeals to two groups of people. One, people that grew up here, and hopefully, this will activate some memories for them, and jog their mind, and, and they'll have some very fond thoughts about it. And then, as I said before, the growth in this city is amazing. I mean, it's in downtown St. Pete. And I'd love to know, I wonder, it's obviously no way to know, but there's got to be a lot of baseball fans that probably have no clue that baseball was even played down there. So I think it can be something, it's one group of people that I think that would be interested in purchasing the book to recall those memories. And then the other group would be to learn about the history that there. And to that end, I think it would be really cool if you had some kind of plaza down there where people could spend some time reading about, what another anecdote that I loved was, Bill White, who I got to talk to, by the way, and he still, he first thing he said to me when I got him on the phone was, my mind's not that good anymore, but he was really good. And he, his debut, he got traded from the Giants to the Cardinals, and he made his debut, and I think he hit a home run that day, and he went on to become the president of the National League. Well, that same day, that night, John F. Kennedy spoke at LA.
Wow.
So you had, and he talked about the virtues of hiring, older people in the workforce, of course. But on the same day, they both made their debut. They both became, presidents in their own right. Yeah. And, those kind of things, there's so many things like that happen. But anyway, I kind of digressed there. But I do think that, I do think people will find it interesting. It's a light read. It's not, it's not anything that's going to wear your brain out. But I just think I tried to write it almost as if when we used to write the game notes. I would say, let's not write anything, let's not put anything down that has no chance of getting in the newspaper or getting mentioned on a broadcast or getting picked up by a columnist. And so I kind of wrote it that way, in a way. I kind of thought like, every sentence that has something that's interesting in it is really important here.
Yeah, no, I loved reading it. Like I thought it was a nice mix of sort of a narrative history, but then also more, notes or blurbs, about specific players or games or moments. So I think it's going to appeal way beyond St. Pete people, whether they're new or lifetime, but people like me who, as a kid, visited the Grapefruit League, and remembered going to spring training games, or really just, when you think about this pandemic baseball book club and the people that watch these interviews, and they're just baseball fans, and so this is an interesting piece of baseball history that I think any baseball fan would enjoy reading.
That's a good point. I have gotten some emails and actually a couple of calls from people that are not in the area that heard about it, that saw it somewhere and wanted to know how to get it. And they were baseball fans, or they were Yankee fans, or they were Cardinal fans. And there's a pretty good, that those are the two teams that were there the longest. And so it is a lot about their history. But like I said, I really tried to not just make this all baseball statistical kind of stuff. I mean, there is obviously a good bit of that in there, but I really tried to emphasize how impactful this sport was, and that those grounds were to what St. Petersburg became over 7 decades, from a little village that no one knew where it was to everybody in the country knew where it was from, the first quarter of every year for 6 or 7 decades.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been fun, Rick. I want to hold up the book so people will know what they're looking for when they search for it online. Here it is. Congratulations on writing the book. It's really fun to read. Great history. I encourage everybody to buy it. Please say hello to your wife, Susan, and the rest of your family, and best of luck with this book.
Thanks, Andrew. This has been a blast. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.